this is a big issue. This affects a lot of people. We're going to talk about a tube shortage. This is a nightmare scenario for many, many people who listen to this podcast.
Yeah, and if you think getting your Mesa's tough now, let's move on.
Yeah, well, so they use tubes rebranded tubes from all three of the factories that exist. Okay, so let's just be real here. If you don't know your vacuum tube history, around the 90s, there were really only two factories left making tubes. I can believe there's three. And then one of them closed their doors for about 6 months, and people panicked, and they started panic buying tubes. Who's the guy from Electro-Harmonics? Mike Matthews, who already had business ties in Russia, bought the Russian tube factory that closed down and has successfully turned it into a very profitable manufacturer of tubes. There's a very good chance if you're using tubes that, like, they're Electro-Harmonics tubes. If you use Tung Sol, they're EHX. If you use EHX, they're obviously EHX. EHX sells tubes to Mesa Boogie. They sell tubes to, all kinds of brands, Groove Tubes, whoever. And there's some other interesting tube manufacturer stuff that we could talk about. But for the most part, like, everything came out of three places. They came out of Mike Matthews' factory in Russia. There's a factory in the Eastern Bloc Soviet Union. So, like, I think they're in Slovakia. That's what I want to say. And that's JJ, right? So all the JJ branded tubes are really this other company that's making tubes in Slovakia, and then they're rebranding them, okay? And then there is Shiguang, which has now closed its doors. And nobody really knows what's going on with Shiguang. So Guitar World posted an article talking to Mike Matthews about this, and he basically said, like, the way it was written, at least to me, was like kind of cryptic. Like, we don't really know what happened. They're not producing tubes. And some people think that they're moving the factory. Other people think they closed their doors. So it's not really clear what's going on. But at least for the time being, tubes are going to be a little bit harder to find. In fact, I got smart and I found a local dealer. If you want to know why I've been talking to local dealers, and bought myself some 606 power tubes for my Fillmore, just because I know that there's a very good chance that I will want to swap them out, and it may be harder to acquire going into the future.
I might need to buy some tubes for the Mesa or Marshall.
The prices may go up slightly. Right now, Mesa's holding tight on their prices, but it's an interesting conundrum. Because I've heard people talking about, well, maybe we should just go over to Axe-Fx or Fractal or Helix or Kemper or Quad Cortex or whatever other digital solution that gets pretty close. And I kind of shake my head because I want to point out something. There's a market for this stuff. We showed last year the amount of crap that we all bought with stimulus checks.
That we're willing to buy.
That there is a market for this stuff. And there are entrepreneurs in this industry, somebody like Behringer, for example, Uli Behringer, might be like, you know what? Sort of makes sense for us to open up a tube facility at our campus in Shiguang or whatever. And I forget where his campus is located. They got a big ass factory. Would not be a stretch for them to make a state-of-the-art tube manufacturing facility and start churning out tubes that we can all use and benefit from. I honestly, so this is where we get into the manufacturing side of this. So there's one thing that we need to explain to our listeners. When you hear people like Dr. Z, Paul Rivera talk about tubes, they talk about the declination of quality in modern tubes. There's a very simple explanation for this. The tooling that they use to produce tubes, like the metal pieces and filaments and all that stuff inside, is only supposed to last for a certain amount of tubes before it gets replaced. And at least in the EHX factory, they've stretched that stuff for 25 years and literally used it millions of times more than they should have. which is why the quality of tubes is slowly degrading. I'm sure they're doing some work to improve the dyes, but from what I've been hearing from places like Dr. Z and others, is that that's part of the reason why they would rather use an off-kilter new old stock tube rather than the new ones, because it's harder to get new quality ones. I would love for someone to look at Shugwang and want to fill that void and say, you know what? We're not going to use this 60-year-old or 80-year-old bullshit to make tubes. We're going to build a state-of-the-art factory, and we're going to do it in a new way, and it's going to be geared completely for the musician. And so we're only going to produce 6L6s, EL34s, 12AX7s, and variations therein, right? 5771s and all that nonsense.
Yep. Yeah. Once you get out of 6L6s, EL84s, those famous ones, I don't give a crap. But yeah.
But yeah, so like that's why I'm kind of looking at this. I see it as a blessing and a curse. So if we weather the storm, vote with your wallets. Obviously, I would recommend if you are a tube guy, you like tubes, you like vintage gear, buy tubes. Show them with your wallet that you still want this to exist.
Right, that there is a market.
Mm-hmm. And then somebody, and I would not be shocked at all if it wasn't Uli Behringer, because we've already seen him take opportunities like this by building. He makes basically the bucket brigade chip that everyone uses now. He had it designed, and he's having it made and selling them to equipment manufacturers. So so if you bought like your really fancy delay, chances are you gave Uli Behringer money. So don't get mad when you buy one of his little plastic pedals, because it's basically got some of the same componentry that even the really super expensive stuff does, which is kind of funny. We talked about this before with germanium stuff. If there's a market for it, somebody's going to get somebody to make it again. And it happened with Dunlop went out and sourced new germanium transistors. And there's still people debating whether that actually happened. But the people in the know are like, yeah, it probably happened. Because it's not rocket science. It's just like Fulltone going and making the phasal inductors again. I mean, they found a place. They had the spec. They had a bunch of examples. They said, make us these. And they were like, okay. And so now we have this glut of all these vintage parts that were unobtainium that are now being produced again, which is really wild, don't you think? You just have to have economy of scale. You need a company like Behringer, who's got insane amounts of capital and is willing to produce tubes for the rest of us to use. And I'm willing to bet if they start producing tubes, they're going to be better quality than what's coming out of EHX. Because like I said, they're not going to do it. They're not going to buy, 60-year-old vacuum tube production equipment. They're going to redesign it from the ground up. And they're going to get, they'll have state-of-the-art tube testing. And because, like when you go to your tech and if he's got a tube tester, chances are that's been in use since the 50s. I mean, the computerized one that Mesa Boogie has is like uber rare. Because nobody was testing testing tubes with computers. By the time computers came around, everything was moved over to solid state. So, it's just, it's kind of wild when you think about all the fact that we're still based on this technology that's like, was really the bread and butter of the 1920s and 1930s. Right. And persisted for us because it was really convenient and cheap. Even some of the tubes we were using in some of those early 1950s, 1960s amplifiers were done because you could buy them by the truckload for like next to nothing. People didn't. Transistors were expensive in the beginning. You didn't want to use transistors. And then when the price curve changed and transistors became cheaper than tubes is when you saw companies start to explore solid state amplification. So, my gut take on this, Jim, is that tubes going away for a little bit, some particular tubes and specific manufacturer, it's a non-issue. This is news, but it may actually wind up being good news before it's over with, and I think that's very likely. I'm sure that you're going to be able to find other podcasts where they're just going, "Holy crap, this is unbelievable! We're all going to have to, move." No, stop it. That's clickbait. It's not going to happen.
Exactly.
So pay a couple bucks, get some tubes now, hold on to them. In a year or two, this will all be a distant memory, and or there'll still be a shortage, but we'll know where we're going, because somebody will have already jumped in at that point and said, "Nah, we're not going to let this continue for very long because there's money to be made here." Think about that. You'd have the entire industry by the gonads if you were to do this. Like, Marshall's not going to buy tubes from JJ or whoever else if you're producing the best quality stuff. Fender's not going to do it. You know,
right?
Like you'd literally be in bed with everyone in the industry. They'd have to buy from you because it doesn't make sense to buy anywhere else. So I'm kind of shocked this hasn't happened already. But I also think that China has different rules and restrictions. And since the Shugwang factory, I forget what the name of the company is that owned that factory. Since that factory was already in existence, they may have had a limit on how many tube factories they allow in the country.
Right.
Which may have prevented somebody like Uli Berenger from doing that. But we also know that China money talks. So if he really wanted to, he probably could have done it already. And so we'll see how this all pans out. I think some companies are sort of looking at like, well, we've got all these surplus Russian military tubes that we could just use up. And so until this all blows over, I think you'll see some interesting designs come out, I think, too. So anyway, that's that topic. I don't dwell on that too long. Do you have anything to add before we move on?
No, I think there's always been room for improvements. And as you said, a really strong manufacturer in the tube industry right now, with a good quality component. Because at least at the moment, if we think about it, there's been the people that are building amps that are high end. There's more selling than ever, and that, as you said, that if somebody new came into this is the time to strike. If somebody new comes into the market, this is the time to do it. Now is the time to strike while the iron is hot, so to speak. But man, you have to be an electrical engineer. You have to have the capital. You have to have. I mean, you don't have to be an engineer, I guess, if you know people and the right people and you got the money. But for a VC, like what's that guy's name, Mark, whatever, from those guys from the Shark Tank, that's really a good time for them to strike and hit it hard. Yeah, there is one of them, the older guy, that he looks he's a little bit older with grayish hair. I didn't know he buys and sells. He's already a guitar guy. He's already in this market. He's one of those collectors. He's a Joe Bonamassa.
Yeah.
And he's got a couple of videos. I can't remember what his name is though, but from Shark Tank that does that.
I wouldn't be surprised if so like this is something that's worth mentioning. People seem to think that like if the tube factories go down for good, that people like Joe Bonamassa won't be able to get tubes, and once they all dry up, which could be 20, 30 years. Right. I mean, we tend to think that like because tubes are $100 each, new old stock, that there's not a whole lot of them. There are people hoarding them, and they're setting the market prices. So they're still out there. I figure we got probably 50 years on existing tube stock. But here's the funny part. So people think that like you need a factory to do this. There are videos of people making tubes in their house on YouTube. It's a painstaking process. But for people like Joe Bonamassa, he'll pay $1,000 a set. I mean that guy doesn't care. So at the end of the day, it's not going to go away. It might become a super vintage enthusiast thing, but it's not. Right. It's not gonna die. Like this is the. That's the end game of all this. If for some reason my prediction doesn't pan out, you will eventually, 50 years down the line, probably before my death, probably there will be people making tubes out of their house, selling them for insane prices, but it's because there's a lot of labor involved. I mean, it'll take you a day to make a set. I mean, it's not like you're going to be able to do it in an afternoon.
Right. Back in the days of ham radio enthusiasts and stuff, and they're still out there, but not as many. They're in shortwave, and anyway, that really did push the tube market, because just like guitar, those are the best transmitters for the longest time. Mm-hmm. And there were people building those tubes, and those are big tubes.
Yeah, they're the size of a person in some cases. They're massive. Yeah. I've actually, my buddy had a tube that was broke. They had a tube in their house that was from a radio facility, and it was 2 feet around. And they kept it. It was damaged, but they kept it because they're like, these things new are like $20,000.
Oh, I know.
It was like, yeah, some guy built this, over a weekend, kind of deal.
That's crazy, right?
And it's like, oh, all right, well, I mean, I don't know why you have a broken one, but okay. I know it's cool. I'll give you that. It is cool as hell.
I mean, it's something that's you literally have a thing in glass. It's already in its glass. You got
yeah.